Welcome to Women and Resistance, a powerful podcast where we honor the courage, resilience, and revolutionary spirits of women across the globe. Hosted by Aya Fubara Eneli Esquire and Adesoji Iginla, we uncover untold stories of defiance against systemic oppression, whether colonialism, racism, sexism, or economic injustice. From historic icons like Winnie Mandela and Fannie Lou Hamer to today's trailblazers, we shine a light upon those shaping a more just world. This is a call to honor the past, embrace the present, and build an empowered future. Yes, greetings, and welcome to another episode of Women and Resistance, your regular podcast where we honor women who did not simply exist in history but disrupted it. Today, we turn our focus to a woman who walked into the White House, not as a guest, nor a token, but as a questioner of power. And we need more of them today in the kind of times we live in. And I speak of none other than Alice Allison Dunnigan. Welcome to Women and Resistance. It's a thrilling honor for us to have you here as the first African-American woman to receive the White House press accreditation, also as the first Black woman member of the Senate's House and Representative Press Galleries. I mean, without over-exaggerating such achievement, could you tell us what it was like going through those times with the indignities of said times? I'm talking about the Jim Crow era in which you worked and also succeeded.
Well, good evening. Good evening to all of your audience and your viewers. And wow, the technology that you all get to experience today is quite amazing. Would have made my work even so much more impactful, I suppose. And so definitely for those of you who have any interest in journalism, grab it with both hands and use this technology to do some good in the world. Because as you rightly pointed out, I felt it back in my day, but even more so now, we need courageous voices. We need journalists of integrity. And so, yes, I'm very honored to be here with you tonight. Of course, with the technology, some of you may be watching this in the morning, in the afternoon, I don't know, 2 weeks, 10 years from now. But whenever you watch this, my name is Alice Allison Dunnigan, and I was born on April 27, 1906, on a red clay hillside near Rossville, Kentucky. And I lived long enough to ask questions of presidents who did not want to answer me. I lived long enough to work with a Black press that at the time understood their role to be purveyors of information to our community, but also to be representatives of the race in rooms where the average Negro at the time could not be in. So we had to be the voices for our people. And it was an honor and a duty, a responsibility that I took very seriously.
Okay.
I want to begin by saying something very plainly. Nothing about my life was accidental, and none of you should live your lives as accidents either. Every barrier that I crossed, race, gender, class, geography, I crossed deliberately with resolve and often, let's just be really candid, with some fear. And almost always, unfortunately, without protection. I did not come from wealth. As a matter of fact, my grandparents were enslaved. My father was a sharecropper, and my mother made a living by taking in the laundry of, the white people around us. That is how she made her living. But my parents were determined that even though I was a girl, and often girls were, we weren't quite expected, that the expectations for girls were much lower than they were for black boys. And of course, the expectations for black people, period, were low to begin with. But my parents started to send me to school one day a week, even before I was of official school ages. They would say I was 4 years old. And so by the time I actually started school, I could read.
Had an age.
So I did not come from wealth. I did not come from connections. I did not come from the privilege as we would think of it, privilege today. But I did come from a family that taught me about being somebody. And I came from a community where you had to fight to live. And I suppose being born and raised in that community gave me a little extra oomph. And so I was ready to go out into the world and to know that nothing was going to be handed to me. And in fact, one of the quotes from my son, Robert, my son, Robert, would always say, Mom was definitely the definition of persistent. I just did not quit. I came from sharecropping, from segregation, from underfunded schools, from long walks to classrooms that were never meant to prepare Black children for leadership, one-room shacks, and still I became a journalist who stood shoulder to shoulder with the best of our Black leaders and who stood in the White House press room, the first Black journalist to do so. My parents were Willie and Lena Pittman Allison. And as I told you, my father was a sharecropper. His crop was tobacco. My parents were strict, disciplined, and they were unromantic about survival. What they gave me was not ease, it was expectation. Now, our family, we owned our own home, which was very rare for Black families in Logan County at the time. But ownership did not protect us from Jim Crow. Remember when I told you I was born? What year did I say? 1906, right? 1906. It's important when you are having these conversations, just because we are speaking through this technology and this medium, it's important that you try to, in your mind,
understand context,
transport yourself back to the time in which the person who is now talking with you actually lived. Do any of you have a living parent who was born in 1906? Probably not. It was a very different time. Think about what was happening all around the world for Black people at that time. Of course, here in the United States, we were called Negroes. Our ownership of a home did not shield us from poverty. It only meant that when the world tried to reduce us to nothing, we at least had some ground underneath our feet. But as a Black girl, I was not taught to dream. I was taught to endure. Life was something you endured. But you know what? I dreamt anyway. So beginning at age 4, going to school one day a week, I walked miles to school, bundled against the cold, mocked for my clothes, and I just saw some of you listeners snicker. I saw you because you've heard that story from your parents and grandparents telling you that they had to walk through sleet. They walked up the hill going to school and walked up the hill coming down. I saw you snicker, but you know what? Snicker all you want. Those were hard times. And so when I hear of, when I see, when I read of Black children, whatever the obstacles are today, who are simply choosing not to show up for school, my God, what have we become? What are we thinking? Where are the parents? Where's the community? Yes, I was mocked for my clothes, even by my peers, my Black peers, ignored by a system that had already decided you can only go but so far. But you know what? I loved school. And by the time I was 13 years old, I was already writing one-sentence stories for our local newspaper. Now, think about this. Back when you guys had, what do you call it? Was it Twitter? That was after my time. Some of you struggled to be able to get across your point in how many characters did they give when they first came out?
Was 108.
Okay, now imagine telling a story, being
40
able to be
characters.
so concise in a sentence. I did that as a 13-year-old. And I would submit small community items on church events, social news, local happenings. And when they were printed, tell you something in me changed. Now, I did notice that they would print them and not pay me, but I was still nonetheless very encouraged by the fact that they saw enough excellence in my work that they were printed. My words were printed. I knew then that my writing could take me places my body had never been allowed to go. And maybe, just maybe, that writing could open doors where my body could then go.
Okay.
So I started with local segregated public schools in Logan County up to the 10th grade, because that's about as much as the white structure felt like Black kids needed to get an education. After the 10th grade, go wash some clothes or go work for somebody or go farm, right? We did not have any need for any education beyond the 10th grade. But I pushed on, and I ended up attending the Kentucky Normal and Industrial Institute, now Kentucky State University, where I received my teacher training certification. I took coursework in education and in pedagogy. This was in the 1950s. And then I proceeded to attend night classes at Howard University, taking courses in economics, statistics, and government-related studies when I moved to Washington, D.C. Now, understand, I was never allowed the luxury of just being a student. I worked while learning, and I learned while working. That was just the way it was. I became a teacher because teaching was one of the few professions available to Black women that allowed some level of intellectual engagement. But teaching also made the lie visible. Now, what lie, you ask me? I'm glad you asked the question. I was expected to teach history from books that entirely erased Black Kentuckians. So, when you are faced with a problem, what do? Do you complain? Do you whine? Do you throw a tantrum? Do you give up? What do you do when you are faced with the problem?
You adapt.
Well, I chose to solve the problem. So I created my own materials, what I called Kentucky fact sheets. And I proceeded to share Black inventors from Kentucky, Black farmers from Kentucky, Black educators from Kentucky, Black soldiers from Kentucky, Black civil leaders from Kentucky. Yes, I began to teach them that Black people from Kentucky had also contributed in all fields and in all ways. And years later, those sheets became my book, The Fascinating Story of Black Kentuckians. You can go look that up. This, some may argue, was my first act of resistance, refusing to teach absence as truth. But some may argue there was an earlier act of resistance. See, I got married fairly young, as women were wont to do at the time. And my husband was a farmer as well. But I did not take too well to the life that he thought I was going to be subscribed to living. I wanted to engage myself intellectually. And so I left that marriage. Sacrilegious, some would say.
But so,
perhaps one of my many acts of resistance. But let us carry on. Like I said, my first marriage ended rather young. We often got married because it was the thing to do, and it provided, or was supposed to provide, a sense of stability and a sense of continuity. It was not. I was expected to abandon any ambition to settle into domestic labor and to silence the part of myself that wanted more. I couldn't do it. Later, I did remarry I married Charles Dunnigan, 1932. He was a childhood acquaintance, and we had one son, Robert William Dunnigan, whom I raised largely on my own when that marriage also did not quite end in eternal marital bliss. The demands of journalism, some might argue my ambition, travel, and independence strained that marriage. This may sound very familiar to today's working woman. We eventually separated. I loved my child deeply, but I could not foresee just disappearing and giving up all my dreams just for the sake of motherhood. So I wanted motherhood without submission. And that cost me dearly. It cost me socially. It cost me emotionally. And it most certainly cost me financially. And when I tell you that I went through a lot of my life without protection, you had better believe it. And I will not elaborate tonight on that. So I did eventually, at the outbreak of World War II, there were more opportunities opening for women to get into the workforce. I have to tell you that I really view racism and sexism as the twin evils, right? But, and I think some other person that you have interviewed recently has come to the same conclusion. Of the two, racism and sexism, I think sexism may just be the one that has taken me out. Because it is one thing to do with the racism, but when you come back to your community and still the black man wants to have his proverbial knee on your neck because you are a woman, those twin
atrocities,
right? The discrimination, that's a lot to bear. So, World War II breaks out. So many of the men are off fighting the war. Jobs open up. A few more jobs open up for women. I take my chance, and I start off as a typist. I'm working with the American Negro Press, and I eventually work my way up. Can I tell you, I was hired by Claude Barnett. Grateful for the opportunity because it opened other doors. Can I tell you that after he passed, when he made his transition and went through his papers, and his papers are stored in Chicago at this time. No, let me backtrack with this story. Initially, I was paid half a cent per word. Now I'm living in Washington, D.C. Where can I afford to live for that kind of money? Finally, after much agitation on my part, I was promoted to $25. No, first I was promoted to $30 a month. And so part of what I did to be able to keep a roof over my head was I worked in the building that I lived in, shoveling coal into the furnace to keep the building warm. I was an educated woman, writer, journalist, but I shoveled coal just to be able to get a discount on my rent to be able to have a roof over my head. Finally, I got an increase in my pay to $25 a week, which now brought me to $100 a month. Like I said, when Mr. Barnett passed away and people went through his papers, I found out that on numerous occasions, although I had worked for the American Negro paper, American Negro Press, for 14 years, and my salary had never increased after that $25 a week raise, I stayed there for the rest of the time that I worked there. I found out that Mr. Barnett had repeatedly offered a higher salary to men to lure them into the position, and that on one occasion, a man had actually been offered $250 a month. But I, a woman, writing articles that were appearing, headlines that were appearing in 112 weekly Negro papers across the United States and Africa, never got another race. And as a matter of fact, let's talk a little bit about what I have been celebrated for, which was becoming the first woman. Well, let's start at the very beginning here. Becoming the first African-American woman on a presidential tour, right?
Yep.
But there are so many other achievements that you have already announced and attributed to me. So when I first tried to get into the White House press corps, it was exclusively for the daily papers. So they didn't make it a race thing, but they also knew that at that time there was only one Black daily paper. So automatically making it a daily paper, and that daily paper was, I believe, in Atlanta. So automatically you're going to exclude all the Black papers. So I told my editor and my boss, Mr. Barnett, I said, I'm going to fight this. And he said to me, what makes you think that you as a woman are going to be able to do what a man has not been able to do? He said that to the wrong Black woman. And so I fought on. Now, I needed a letter of recommendation from him as my supervisor to the White House press corps. And he refused to provide me with one.
You are listening to Women and Resistance with Aya Fubara Eneli Esquire and Adesoji Iginla, where we honor the voices of women who have shaped history through courage and defiance. If you're finding these stories inspiring, take a moment to subscribe, share, and support this platform. Together, we amplify the voices that deserve to be heard. Now, back to the conversation.
Wow. But I did not back down anyway. And finally, I was admitted. Now, once I did get admitted, now understand what used to happen before I got admitted to the White House press corps. They have an area for the press where they have typewriters and all kinds of amenities where the press can sit, they can type their stories, get things out. They have access to White House officials and of course, all the press briefings and all of that, right?
The mail room.
And then they have a gallery that is for the public. Now, if you are not part of the White House press corps, you can go to the gallery. Of course, you can't ask any questions. You're not able to sit down. You don't have your own equipment and things of that. And you don't have access to the typewriters and things of that nature. But also, they rotate people. They rotate tourist area because they want the public as many people in the public to be able to come in.
Yeah.
So you could be rotated out at any time. And so it was very difficult for Black journalists then to ever get, cutting edge news, to be able to have the stories at the beginning. It's almost like you had to wait for it to be published by your white counterparts, and then you're basically rewriting their stories. And I did not want to do that. So I finally get into the white press, it felt like that, the White House press corps. But now here's the deal. If you are traveling with the president or traveling on anything that requires resources to move around to get access, my supervisor, the establishment I worked for said, you have to finance yourself. Yes, I financed my own reporting trips. Now, I should be fair. The American Negro press relied on the weekly papers to pay a certain subscription fee, and that's where we got our resources for some of the work we were doing. Well, if you don't have a lot of advertising going into the Black newspapers, those papers are also not making a lot of money to also be able to pay their subscription fee. So there was a lot going on. And so to the extent that white establishments don't invest in our papers, and maybe we don't have as many businesses that can also take out ads and things of that nature, or a lot of people who are buying the newspaper, you can see how the weeklies are strapped, which is why we were not daily papers, right?
Okay.
And then if the weekly papers are strapped, what they're sending, they were often late on what they needed to send to the American Negro press.
Yes.
And so that also created limited funds for what we could do, although, having said all of that, there was still the issue of sexism and lack of support. So when I got to go on President Truman's tour, again, just being very persistent and asking for that opportunity, the American Negro press, I thought they would be all over it because a Black journalist had never gone on a presidential tour.
This was to the
and
West
they
Coast?
told me
This was
I
to
was,
the West Coast?
yes, they told me I was on my own. And so I borrowed $500 from a bank. I was a member of Sigma Gamma Rho. They took up a collection and they bought me a blouse. I used some of my own money. But I was often criticized for how shoddy I looked, that I was not a sharp dresser. I did not have the right accoutrements and the gloves and everything. And I said, I'm a working woman, and where in the world am I supposed to get all this extra money? You have to understand, again, Washington, D.C. was a Jim Crow town. So while I had earned the right to walk into the White House press corps, what I could not do was eat around the White House. Most of the diners around there did not let us eat there. I was still restricted as to what kind of transportation I could use, where I could live. So getting into the White House press corps was actually a blessing for me because they also had free food. So at least in covering the White House, I did not have to stuff my bag with whatever I could from home because there was literally not an establishment anywhere around that I could, just duck my head into and get something to eat. So I lived, even as I was making history, I lived with constant financial insecurity. I broke history while worrying about rent. In Washington, D.C., I struggled to find housing. Landlords refused me. Hotels denied me. Segregation dictated where I could sleep. As a matter of fact, while I was on the president's tour with President Truman, at one point, the police harassed me and threatened to throw me off the tour because I did not belong there. The president eventually apologized to me. He stepped in. Now, something else happened on that tour. It was very important to me to ask the questions that no one else was going to ask and to be the representative of my race. And one evening, long after the other press, they'd ask their questions and the things they were interested in, there was a Black man, while President Truman was clad actually in his pajamas and his house coat, who asked a question about civil rights. And the president responded. And I made that the lead for my story. I always tried to find, whatever the story was, to find a way to make it of interest, to tie it in to the issues affecting my community. There were times when I lived in temporary rooms, relying on friends, boarding houses, unsafe accommodations. Think about the irony of walking into the White House.
But yet you don't have a roof over your head.
But not a decent apartment. So in 1947, I became the Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Negro Press. Like I said, serving over 112 weekly papers. I became the first Black woman accredited to the White House. I became the first Black woman with congressional and Supreme Court press credentials. Now, don't get that wrong. Credentials did not mean acceptance, but it did mean I was in the room. And so, even within that press corps, I was one of 3 Black reporters as we continue to grow, and one of only 2 women, and of course, the only Black woman when we went on that president tour with President Truman. Now, not all presidents treated me the same way. So when it came to President Eisenhower, oh my. You guys remember, what is my sister? My young sister. April Ryan, I believe is her name.
Yeah.
Who, the felon you have as masquerading as president right now.
During his first tenure,
yes,
2017.
Did everything he could to try to belittle and silence her. Well, it wasn't the first time in American history it had happened. Because under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, I would attempt to ask questions about segregation, about civil rights, voting intimidation, or about Black sharecroppers being evicted for registering to vote. And you know what? 2+ years, that man refused to ever acknowledge my hand up. Just would look and look away like I did not exist. He could not stand my line of questioning, so he stopped calling on me. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. It was just, I'm going to ignore her. She is invisible. And in my memoir, I wrote that he was hell-bent on gagging me. He did not want me asking these questions about civil rights. And let me tell you about allies. None of those white reporters asked those questions either. This was not neutral journalism. This was power deciding who mattered and what mattered and what would be printed. And let me tell you, I really view journalism as the fourth estate. We talk about Congress, we talk about the presidency, we talk about the Supreme Court. I believe journalism, the press, is the fourth estate. And when we are compromised, when we who should be reporting the truth to the people are compromised, then where do the people get their information from? And that matters. It matters a great deal. Again, I had the great fortune to work with some other presidents, like John F. Kennedy, who absolutely answered my questions and, in fact, offered me a position. I ended up serving as the education consultant on his committee on equal employment opportunity. I also ended up working even under Lyndon B. Johnson as an information specialist in number of federal agencies. And so at this point, I did leave journalism for a number of reasons, not because journalism ever left me, but because I felt maybe I could go on the inside, having reported on these institutions for decades. Maybe I could make a difference on the inside as well. And then there's also that little part of, I really needed to be able to feed myself and live, right? Yeah. Let's just be very blunt, candid and honest here, because I had sacrificed for so very long. And so you can read my autobiography, which I published in 1974, titled A Black Woman's Experience from Schoolhouse to White House. I did not write it as a victory lap, not at all, but as a testimony of what I experienced. And unfortunately, what continues to prevail today, because did I not hear that not too long ago, the last Black editor for the Washington Post was fired? Yep. So in this 2026 year, right, we are still facing the same kind of issues that I dealt with way back when I was a journalist, which is that there are very few opportunities in journalism and particularly in mainstream, quote unquote, media for Black people, fewer for Black women. And when you talk about the editors and the top echelon of mainstream media, you can barely find us. And now you find that when we even get into those positions, we are going back to a time where they are just simply rolling back the time and getting rid of us all over again. So, wow, the more things change, it appears, the more things are staying the same, which just goes to show that we must continue this fight and that we must continue to encourage and invest in young people and explain to them, teach them the importance of reading and writing and critical thinking and embracing this field of journalism, especially now that you truly, like what you're doing, young man, can help to get the truth out to people without waiting for the establishment to give you permission, right?
Yeah.
This is something that you are doing and that many others can do. And I encourage those who are watching you today, encourage this young man. Spread the information, support him. The reason why we have so few Black publications today is because we failed to do what we were supposed to do in our community to support our own publications. How is it that we are making more money today than we made when I was alive, because I have since made my transition, and we have fewer Black media today than we did back then? How is that possible? Can someone explain that to me? If not that we simply stopped doing the things that we should do. Let me pause because I'm so excited to speak with you and so much I want to share. But let me pause before I say anything else. Is there something that you would like to say or ask at this time?
Yes. I mean, you started with regards to journalism today in across the world. What would you say is a stark difference between when you were practicing and what you see now in terms of, I mean, we have the tools to play with, like you rightly admitted at the beginning, or the use to which said tools are put has defeated the liberation of the mind, which is the most important thing we can have. So the question is, how can we go back, capture the essence of what you used to do, and translate that into action for today's journalists?
Well, what do you think? Very interesting question. So I'm going to turn it back to you. I see the work you're doing. How did you come about the work that you're doing?
Okay, so my take is this. There is an old African proverb which says, as long as the lions do not have historians, the story of the hunt will continue to glorify the hunters. You see it readily today. The first medium that goes out, the headlines that goes out, basically erases anybody that does not fit into the main structure of what they consider to be legitimate grievance. You see it in the United States, the anti-DEI direct, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You see it in the UK, where it's anti-woke and what have you. And you see it across the world. What makes matters even worse is people that look like you and I will be the one that will champion the same thing that will basically just erase them. It's like, oh, it's too much, it's this, it's making them uncomfortable. It's like, how can you be part of something and not have a say in it? I don't understand. So that is my take. It's like journalists now are basically just stenographers of power. You're just repeating what they want you to write. You're not asking questions.
So what led you to the work that you're doing now? Why are you doing the work you're doing now?
Is that you read, you see the works of the greats, and you see now, and it's like, what is going on? It's like, it's almost, we've gotten...
So what happened in your childhood that brought you to this place, if anything?
It's history. The realization of history is a lived experience. Your history is a continuous experience. It's not just what happened yesterday. It's happening as we speak. AI is basically now writing our history because we're not writing it. We're not chronicling it. We're not taking pictures. We're not shooting videos. The videos we are shooting are videos for now. They are not videos that can translate later. They're not videos that can give you context of what it is your experience is now. There is none of that. The greats they've done They've done their bits. We're reading the works of the greats. What are the future going to read about now?
What I've heard from you and what I've heard from other people and what I experienced as a child growing up and what I saw even in that generation, not quite my generation, but like my son's generation, I saw families talking about current issues. I saw families when we did have radio, listening to the news and having a discussion. And even if it's children being quiet, but they're hearing the analysis of the elders around them.
Yeah.
Children saw their parents reading or someone around them reading a newspaper. They saw adults valuing information. I saw that too. I believe that one of the things we must go back to is creating spaces where we can share information, facts. We can talk about, okay, what happened? How does it relate to your lived experience? What happened in Congress or at your city council meeting? What does that mean for your neighborhood, your city, what does that mean for your child's classroom? And help people connect the dots so that they understand the importance and power of journalism. When we don't have these discussions, then we allow them, and there is a them. It is a system that wants to keep us so preoccupied with nonsense while our lives are being manipulated. And so what they push in front of us and in front of our children through all of these things that can be tools for good or tools for our distraction, we push the music and we push the dancing animals and we push the
lifestyle,
the playing the all kinds of sports, and we push the people are fighting. And we push everything except critical thinking and so even the journalists, because they want to get, what do you people call it?
Clicks.
The clicks. Instead of asking questions and writing pieces or creating reports that engage the intellect, they want to just engage the fancies of people. Just tickle the fancy, entertain as well, the salacious, and that's it. So I commend you for what you're doing, however small you might think it is, because what you're doing is going to inspire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And all we need, because when I started,
you're the only one
of a sharecropper, I had no idea what impact I would have, but I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And I definitely appreciate talking to people today, because I dare say that most of the people watching or listening to me today have never heard of me. And there's a reason for that. I mean, you can ask your guests, your listeners, had they ever heard of me before today? So we must tell our stories. So I thank you, so that our young people even know, wow, what happened to April Ryan? What happened to Alcinda? These are not the first time Black women have been marginalized. There's a reason why there are not that many of us in there. It is systemic.
Yeah.
But now what are we going to do about it? And so you can imagine when I saw Karine Pierre as the
White House
White House press secretary. Wow. But I don't even know if she knows my name. I hope she does. Because had there not been an Alice Allison Dunnigan, I don't know that she would have been able to step into the role that she did. But all of us have a role to play. Next time you have your grandbabies with you, or just put them on your lap and just watch the news with them. Just 5 minutes, and ask them, what do you think? Let them tell you what they saw, what they think. and get them to process that. What can you do about it? What would you have asked? And start that training. Yes, I would definitely say that. Just a few more things I want to share with you, if you don't mind.
Please go ahead.
You know, I am grateful that I am not completely erased or ignored. There is a statue, an exhibit. If you ever go to Russellville, Kentucky, go to the Sikh Museum, SEEK Museum, and they have a statue of me and an exhibit of me. I also eventually got inducted into the Journalism Halls of Fame, some of them posthumously. The White House Correspondents Association also has the Dunnigan Payne Lifetime Achievement Award. But I think that largely the reason that I'm not known as well, one, I worked for the Black press, not for mainstream press institutions or mainstream white institutions. I was a Black woman, not a comfortable symbol, not a tall, dashing Black man. And I think probably most importantly is that I asked questions that disrupted power. I did not go in there to just be grateful to be there. I did not go in there to be window dressing. I asked questions that disrupted power. And so history remembers those who are easy to honor and often chooses to forget those who refuse to be quiet. But I did not become a journalist to be liked. I became a journalist because it was necessary. I asked those questions that I asked, even though silence would have been safer. I persisted when invisibility was enforced. But I made those spaces and I made those sacrifices so others could enter. And so as I, wrap up my time with you this evening, I want to share with you, with the work you're doing and with all of the people who are listening now or later. Listen, if there's something I learned during my time, something that is clear from what is going on today as we see the systematic rollback of a lot of the gains that it seems we had made as Black people, it's that progress is not granted. It's not granted. It's not guaranteed. Not without your persistent effort. Progress is pressed into existence. And so you never get to a point where you're like, okay, I've arrived, so we stop. No, you keep working towards the kind of world that you want to have exist. You keep disrupting power. You keep showing up in places where they would rather you not show up. And to do that, you must keep working on your own development, your own growth, so that when you show up in those places, you can actually make a difference.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's been an honor to have had Alice Allison Dunnigan, the lady with firsts, take us through what it was like living and walking through Jim Crow, as it were. And yes, this is part of a series that we do here, which is for Women in Resistance, where we highlight the roles of Black women and the role they've played and continue to play, because their stories continue to drive the generation of today in the constant liberation struggle that we have to endure.
May I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, go on.
I just wanted to show your listeners what I used to look like. That was me on the steps in front of Congress. You see me and my hat and my pen. Always had a pen, always had something to write with. In this picture, I am interviewing the aunt of the boys who were accused of raping a white woman.
Scottsboro boys.
This was the Martinville boys.
Oh, okay.
It's crazy. There's so many of these cases, but what I did was go to our stories and tell our stories and tell them to expose the things that the white media would never tell. I needed to tell it from our perspective. And that is what I would still challenge journalists today to do.
Yeah, it goes back to that African proverb, which is the lions must now have their own historians. Otherwise, our stories will continue to glorify the hunter. That said, today we've spoken to Miss Allison Dunnigan. Next week, it will be the turn of Kambasa. Again, who she is, you would find out if you do tune in. And for everyone that's come through, if this is your first time, do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you know anytime we go live. We also have part of the series on this channel. We do African News Review, which highlights the role of Africans and the African diaspora. And that is on Sunday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And January, the last Saturday of this month, we'll be doing the first in our series of Griots and Books. We'll be looking at Pre-Colonial Black Africa by Cheke Atediop. So this is a space where we want to challenge our ways of thinking and also how we grow as people. So like, share, and subscribe. And again, thank you, Miss Dunnigan, for coming. And until next week, from me, it's good night and God bless.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That is it for this episode of Women and Resistance. Thank you for joining us in amplifying the voices of women who challenged injustice and changed the course of history. Be sure to subscribe, share, and continue the conversation. Together, remember, we honor the past, act in the present, and shape the future. Until next time, stay inspired and stay in resistance.